welcome to another episode of the Creating Belonging podcast. Today, I have with me Michael Stein. Michael, if you would just take a few moments to introduce yourself.
Okay. My typical story is one of being a long shot. I do a podcast called Long Shot Leaders, and I consider myself a long shot. My grandmother escaped the Russian concentration camps on the way to America. And my dad was a New York homeless street kid. Became a multimillionaire only to be homeless again. And then, I had to sleep in the same room with my grandmother when I was, until I was like 9 years old because I was the youngest. So I'd hear that story about how she escaped the Russian concentration camps, and my dad, I heard about, you're lucky to have what you have because, we grew up in a rich family in a rich neighborhood, but we were a poor family. We were like the Encino Jubilees, we you had the old cars in a nice area, but so you should appreciate what you have. I was a premature kid, health issues, ADD. They didn't know what it was back then, dyslexia, and just awkward. Not a lot of wins, and other than making people laugh. And then one day, my parents took me, like most American kids, they took me to see a movie called Rocky, and I was like, wow, this is going to change my life. This guy's like me. He's funny, but he's not successful, and he keeps on getting knocked down. He keeps on trying, and I said, the only difference in this guy and myself is he's physically fit. So then every day after that, I started working out. I was like 11 or 12 years old. And then by the time I was 16, I became a physical fitness trainer. And I was like, what you would consider the epitome of health at that time. And I said, wow, that's, people are commenting how, physically fit I was. And I was like, well, that's two things. I can make people laugh, and I can now, train people, and I'm successful at being physically fit. So I was like, wow, time plus effort. So my high school, as I was graduating, my high school tutor asked me, what do you want to do for, after you're done with high school? I said, well, I want to be an entrepreneur, an actor, and a stand-up comedian. She goes, you might want to just work with your hands because not everybody's meant to do what they want to do. And I said, screw you. My dad didn't even finish the 8th grade, and he became a multimillionaire. Granted, he's living in a van outside of the house right now, but, visiting my mom, but, he was successful, and I'm graduating high school. So I started my own company a day after I graduated high school, and made 2 sales within 20 minutes, selling out of my bedroom, selling tools. And after that, I failed miserably. I didn't sell anything, and I was like, it's summertime and everybody's having fun. I was like, screw it. So then I took some acting courses at local city college along with a business class. And I said, I got to start doing stand-up. So I did stand-up. I was 19 years old, 6 months later when I did that. And then I brought a lot of people there. I said, I'm really not going to make money doing stand-up. You do open mic nights and all that. But I said, I could start to promote nightclubs, because in Los Angeles, where I was born and raised, that was a big business back then, back in the late 80s. So I said, I'm going to be a nightclub promoter. So then 6 months later, I became the #1 nightclub promoter in my age bracket. And I was like, wow, here we go again, time plus effort, as long as you believe in yourself. So I started from there, it opened up the door for a lot of things, to be an actor and a filmmaker. My first acting role was playing Dirt Diggler in the Dirt Diggler story, which became Boogie Nights, which I appear in as well. It was a short film to Boogie Nights, and that turned into a big motion picture, and I appear in Boogie Nights I was like, wow, I see how this process is done. So I started making my own films and won a lot of awards for that. And it was a long journey of there. I quit my nightclub business to make movies. And, it came to a point where I didn't have any money, and I wanted to make a feature film because I got close to getting a movie deal for my short films. It was an award-winning short film. And I said, I got to be an entrepreneur again. And the only problem is, I didn't have any money. I was broken in debt. I didn't have any money to make the film. I didn't have any money to start a business, but I started building a website, sell tarps online, which is a niche thing. And I heard the riches are in the niches. So within 6 months, I made almost $500,000, and I was able to pay for my movie called Love Hollywood Style, which I casted Faye Dunaway, Academy Award actress, and Andy Dick and Coolio, and a crazy cast, and many other actors you've seen. And I got to wrote, direct, produce, act in this film. And I nearly bottomed out the business that I created, the tarsplus.com business. And I was like, I can take care of this business. And the film did well. It got, bought, and it did decent, but I said, I'm going to take care of this business. And since then, that business has earned over $100 million. and continues to grow. And I'm launching another big business called Bolator in 2 months, which will hopefully revolutionize the backpack industry. And I do this podcast called Long Shot Leaders because I said if I'm going to do a podcast, it'd be about people that have overcome large obstacles to find success. And I'm talking to you today because much of that journey I never felt like I belonged. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong, but the journey continues, and that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, Michael, thank you for sharing that. I love the background, like such rich experiences you have. So like we could talk about a ton, but I have a few places I want to dig. I think one of the reasons I reached out and wanted to have you on the podcast was, when I look at the combination of identities that you use to describe yourself, entrepreneur, actor, writer, director, producer, stand-up comedian, and then personal development expert, and that there was this combo that I was like, this guy sounds interesting. I think we can have a fun conversation. Let's chat. So I want to pick up on kind of where you just left off, because this is actually one of the areas that I wanted to dig into. You've been really a lifelong entrepreneur, and that can be kind of a lonely journey at times. So I'm curious how you've built community and found places to fit in and belong in your career.
Well, I'm an entrepreneur because I don't feel like I was ever hireable, and all I know is entrepreneurs. My dad was an entrepreneur. His dad was a fruit peddler, or his dad was actually a manager for Jimmy Durante for a couple times. He's just like a jobber, he's searching around. But I come from a long line of like entrepreneurs. When my grandmother escaped the Russian concentration camps, her dad, my great grandfather, he owned one of the only candy factories in Kiev, and he had to leave it all because they didn't like Jews back then either. So you know, uh, I've always heard this story. That's what you have a family of entrepreneurs. Working for other people just didn't seem real to me. It seemed more real to me to start your own company because that seemed like more. It seemed easier
Hmm.
rather than somebody choosing me because I didn't feel like anybody would want to choose me either. That was the problem I had with acting. It's like auditioning. I was like, I felt like people don't want to choose me. It's just the insecurity part of it, and I felt more secure just starting my own business. And that's the sense of the belonging. Is like the only time when I was younger, it started. Because being awkward, and having just these idiosyncrasies that I had, making people laugh at me or making them laugh at anything, was the icebreaker. So those were my tools to make people laugh. And my entrepreneurial career is just because I felt like it was just more doable.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if you think about and that was actually another area that I wanted to dig. So maybe let's go a little bit deeper there and look at the intersection there of the role that comedy has played in, you being an entrepreneur, kind of digging into comedy. And you do that because you're like, to paraphrase what you just said, to make people laugh, made you feel good. And even if they were laughing at you, like you were giving people enjoyment. So I'd love to hear more about, if you think about belonging, your feeling of belonging and comedy, whether people are laughing at you or with you. I want to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, it's tough because stand up, you can easily feel like you don't belong because they don't laugh at you. You feel like, well, here we go again. All those old feelings come back. But it's
Hmm.
just it's just inherent in who you are. And it's interesting with stand up, I just did stand up I'm taking a break with it because I got to launch my company Bolator, but I was doing stand up I think it was about 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, and right now it's interesting because sometimes you could always feel like you don't belong. I'm like right now I guess I don't feel along because I'm a Caucasian Jewish guy, older Jewish guy. I'm not the young comedian anymore. And it's like it's tough time for the Jews. Because there's a lot of stuff's going on, and it's almost like there's a lot of people that want to say things, and you got to grow tough skin when it comes to try to get laughs. So that sense has been interesting and navigating that. But there's always a corkscrew. There's always a way to, and that's what I love about stand up. There's always a way to try to find the rapport and try to find common ground and try to find a joke that, because people are people really at the end of the day. They all want the same things. They all have six human needs, psychology, which I believe in, which is a more personal development thing where people just want to feel certainty. They want a sense of variety. They want a sense of love and connection and growth and significance. And if you could find the rapport of, who you're talking to, whether it's stand up or me and you today, you find out what, you're feeding those people their six human needs. They just have different vehicles for it. Everybody's got a different thumbprint on how to get the vehicle for those needs. And that's how I navigate through that.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to dig into one piece there. So your kind of Jewish identity and as a comedian and kind of the rise in anti-Semitism right now. I want to dig a little more there. It's surprising to me that that would even come up. I mean, it is and it's not, right? Like, I don't know, if you're in a comedy club, like, why are you like, I don't know, like, what experiences have you had that have been kind of backlash against?
It happens. I don't know. Like, I've, sometimes like just recently, and nothing too extreme, not like the one that had the girl that with the bottle through the can, the beer threw at her or whatever, that the Jewish comedian girl. But, I was on stage and I did a routine and, I didn't say anything bad about anybody in particular, but I said I didn't say anything about Jewish or whatever. Like another comedian came, I was like, easy Jewish guy or something like that, and then other comedians, like, and that's really weird because out here in Austin, Texas, which is like, you think it's not a small, somebody was like, just went into their own little rant about, you know, uh, Jewishness and all that, and I was, hey, look, people, you got to be able. There's a big world out there, 8 billion almost, right? So people are going to have opinions, so you just got to realize like what the thing that helped me through that is realizing what need are they trying to meet, by saying something that would be a negative vehicle towards meeting one of those needs. What is it? Significance? Is it trying? Is it trying to gain connection with another group that they're with? So that's kind of like mollifies my. It breaks it down to like matrix to me. Like because I think everybody is operating off of the same six human needs. And from it's very Tony Robbins thing, but I've done everything that he's ever done. So I'm kind of you'll hear a lot of parallels between Tony Robbins and me, but I think that people operate by those things, and so that's helped me navigate through that though, because recently has been tough, to hear some of those things because of my background. But you know, everybody start to realize, it really forces you to be objective as well, so that's important as well to be objective so you don't judge people, until you look at yourself as well.
Yeah, it's that I like how you're positioning that, and I do think some of those statements, like if somebody's in a crowd and they yell something like that, I think it is connection. It's their perceived way of connecting with others, thinking like I'm saying the thing that everyone else is thinking. And so it's
Right.
their way of standing up with others that in their own mind.
Yeah, they
Uh,
might feel like they're contributing as well, and that's a
yeah.
that's a noble need, but it's also a negative vehicle if you feel if your contribution is being negative to you. There's a triad. It's called the triad of a good decision.
Mhm.
If it's good for you and it's good for me and it's good for the greater good, you need all three. Then it's a try. There's a exact not exact science. It's a great art form, but you need those three to. That's the triad of a good decision.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. When it makes me think when I try to bring that back to the creating belonging model, I'm thinking about it's that the acceptance piece of, am I expressing my values in a way that are trampling on someone else? Or am I, suspending my own values to try to let someone else in? And that's, kind of where we like to focus. The other thing I'm curious about in your comedy, so back to kind of, I always like to just tie back into the model and then we go from there. So on the authenticity side, authenticity requires a lot of vulnerability. And I would assume I've tried to do comedy in front of people like briefly and have failed miserably. And so, in my experience, it requires a lot of vulnerability. I would imagine getting up on stage repeatedly requires a lot of vulnerability.
Right.
So I'm curious. Tell me a little bit more about your experience with that.
That comes really inherently because my mother, who's this good looking Marilyn Monroe lady right next to her right here, she had the personality of Don Rickles, really warm one who she's Don Rickles is actually a really loving guy, very funny. And so my mom, was very open about everything, So I grew up in an environment, so was my dad. So I grew up around a lot of volatility. My dad, my mom got divorced, but I was around a lot of, stuff. My mom would say like she'd just say things out of blue of like it's like I got a really upset stomach, but we're gonna go to eat Chili's. And I remember like I see this waitress and she's putting the order, she's a little attractive, and I'm younger before I was married, and I was like, this is Chili's, maybe I should get the chili. And my mom's like, you can't eat that, you got diarrhea. I was like, nothing is censored, nothing is like everything is like out in the open. And my mom was just that kind of lady that she's like very little censor, and she would just say things like, I was the youngest, and she's like, my son, I didn't plan on this one. I drank, I smoked, I ran up and down the stairs, but he survived. But I say that because now I love him because I said it out loud. And that way I'm copping to it. That was a way of showing her, that she loved me. The truth was, loving. If I got too big for my britches, she would love to knock me down a little bit. If I needed some boosting, she would lovingly boost me up. So that's where my stand up comes from. My mother being and my whole family just being so open. There's not a lot of sensory there. You just talk about like you could literally ask me anything right now and I'm almost going to be like probably be inclined just to like tell you like the personal details of my life just because it's just easier for me and that's the way I've been built.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely identify with that. I think I've worked on trying to add some filters just because most of the people around me don't always appreciate how open I am. And talking about those awkward things. I don't know where it comes from. It's just somehow how I was built. But I love that. So that vulnerability just comes as a set of your default programming.
Like second
Yeah.
nature. Yeah. I don't, I've had to learn how to censor a little bit because in the past, I was just like, such a wild animal, just blurting out or saying things, and I didn't know, I don't want to pay too much heed to ADHD, but I learned it had as an adult, and I don't want to give it a moniker because I still believe that you can control, your mind control is very important, but I fit all the boxes, so, I blurting things out, being very impulsive. That's my second. I got to make sure that that you're aware of that. It's like, okay, let's take our time, not knee jerk react, and so I do have to sometimes try to rein it in because I know that I could just flow.
Yeah. That was another one of the topics that I wanted to dig into because you mentioned, when you were younger, when you were a kid, we didn't have all of the words, we didn't have ADHD. And so there was, I'm sure there were many definitions that were thrown around. And now it's something that we would throw in, the bigger bucket of neurodiversity or neurodivergence. And it's a topic that I've been exploring because it does, going back to something that you said, kind of one of the reasons why you're an entrepreneur is because you didn't feel like you were hireable. And we find that I think in the workplace where people who are not neurotypical then don't fit the mold of professionalism that we often think about. But it doesn't mean that those people don't bring talent into the workplace. So I want to talk a little bit about that and the role that that's had in your at any point in your life, if you can think of where it stood out the most, maybe, or I don't know, that and kind of your belonging, like where it either gave you belonging or negatively impacted your belonging.
You know, I believe iron sharpens iron. So I think it's how it helped me. It's hindered me in the past, there's, when I was navigating through it, white knuckling it, and there was no moniker for it. I was put in a special school at UCLA when I was a kid for some, they took me out of my regular elementary school, and it was called Fernald School, and it was for special needs, but they didn't have like the names for it. And I just remember being in there with a bunch of different kind of all, because they just glommed in everybody. It was not like a specialty kind of thing for whatever you were, just like everybody was bunched in. I remember telling the teacher, look, I'll do whatever I got to do to get out of this situation. I feel like I was being punished. I just want to go back to my regular elementary school. You just tell me what I got to do, and I'll study or do whatever I got to do. So I eventually, like 5, 6 months later, my parents said, all right, let's go back, take him back. But they don't know what's going on. It's just a little different. And then also I had, focusing problems with my eyes. It was a form of dyslexia where a great doctor named Dr. Getz in Los Angeles area who's known for having you go through exercises to alleviate your eyes from doing certain things. My eyes would like just, I'd get lost in the page, or like, like the words jumping in front of each other, and like double vision, weird, my own little esoteric kind of problem with that. So, and such a great doctor where, I don't know whether I adjusted it because no one knows, what they, how other people see, but, 2020, and not a problem, right now, at least, or I've adapted. But as far as, going through the, how it's helped, I think that a lot of people that have that similar, situation, it's helped you to have with empathy, um, I'll say a lot of times with people that, for the most part, I've had so many employees throughout the years, tons of employees, so you're always going to find one that might say, that guy, he was this way or that way. But for the majority of the employees you'd ask that work with me, they'll say, he was a really good guy. I like working with that guy, or that doesn't absolve, maybe he didn't pay enough. Always try to be on the highest level of, pay, of understanding, of appreciation, and all that. And I think that being a person that has, that's been humbled in most of their life makes for a more empathetic person to work
Mhm.
with, and relationship wise, same, significant other for 20 years almost. And I think that those things help but you got to work at it as long as you're cognitive of whatever your typical corkscrews are, whatever your weaknesses are. And I think that's why personal development was such a big thing for me, because it gave me a roadmap to say, okay, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I understand that. Let's work on these things. And so along through navigation, I think it's helped me.
Yeah. Okay. The one soundbite I'm taking from that is that those moments of being humbled helped you increase your empathy. And I think, tying that back into the model that is helping us find more acceptance for others. So that's great. And a great closing note. Michael, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me today. I will make sure to share some links in the show notes, but I want to make sure you have a moment to share how should people engage with you if they want to come find you.
Just go to michaelsteinmedia.com. Everything's right there. You'll see there's 3 podcasts right now. That's the Longshot Leaders, which I mentioned, the Stein Time Show, which are actors and comedians, and the Bolator podcast, which launches in March 5th, which is the Kickstarter campaign of Bolator, which is the outdoor brand. We have created a patented brand of backpacks they're called Bolo packs, and they're like it's a tarp, it's a backpack that opens up to a tarp, that's a hammock that has a drain on it that attaches to a soft cooler, or a tactical backpack, or a day pack, or lunchbox, a pack. And it's all these interchangeable backpacks, and they're called Bolo packs. And you can go to bolotour.com and find out more about that. But if you just go to michaelsteinmedia.com, you'll find out more about me and my bio that you saw and all that other stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael. And stay tuned for another episode of the Creating Belonging podcast. Thanks.